what, in your professional opinion, is the biggest long-term policy problem facing New Zealand today?
Well, thank you, Helen, and it's a great pleasure to be an honorary fellow of the foundation. As I'm sure everyone in this panel and online will be aware, globally we face an enormous range of challenges. People talk about a pandemic or a perma-crisis. We face obviously geopolitical issues, ecological issues, technological challenges, all manner of socioeconomic issues and so forth. But it seems to me one of the most critical ones, and this applies for all nations, democratic or otherwise, is how to protect long-term interests, the interests of future generations, in a context where there are very powerful political pressures to focus on the short term. And those political pressures obviously differ from country to country, but in a democracy like New Zealand, politicians are under very significant pressure to deliver short-term goals and gains for citizens in a context where frequently there are significant intertemporal trade-offs, so that by focusing on short-term goals, you may be undermining long-term prosperity or the environment or some other long-term goal. And it seems to me this is an enduring big issue. And that issue has become all the greater in a context where humanity has such a greater capacity to damage long-term interests now than was the case, for example, 50 years, 100 years ago. And that increased capacity to damage future interests obviously is partly related to extraordinary technological innovations over recent generations. So if that's the issue, the question then is, well, how do we address democratic myopia or short-termism? And very briefly, there is no single simple silver bullet answer in my view, but there are multiple things that we can do to try and enhance our capacity to protect long-term interests. We can endeavor, for example, to embed the future in the present in our decision-making, both in the political arena, but also in business. We can do that, for example, among other things, by the kind of discount rate we use. If we use a very high discount rate, obviously we're going to be discounting the future very rapidly. If we use a lower discount rate, then we will be giving more weight to the future. Secondly, we can seek to emphasize and exercise better foresight. And that means investing in a range of foresight techniques, such as scenario analysis and risk assessments and so forth. Thirdly, we can put in place all manner of commitment devices. And we do that, of course, in the form of things like climate targets or child poverty reduction targets. Commitment devices essentially designed to try and strengthen the political incentives for people to deliver for the longer term. And then there's other things we can do. We can amend our institutions, our political institutions, public service and so on, in ways that are going to potentially at least enhance the emphasis we give to long-term considerations. So that's just a very, very quick answer, Helen, to a very big problem, one that I know you've wrestled with over your lifetime. And I'll leave it there and come back to any matters you want to raise subsequently.
Thanks, Jonathan. As you said, there's so much pressure to focus on the short term. But if we only do that, we won't do much at all, because we'll be like a dog chasing its tail around the latest headline. The elders, which I'm a member of, put out a call in the last year or two for what we termed long view leadership. Leaders have to take that long view. Now, of course, you do things in the short term, but many steps in the right direction taken now lead to long-term solutions if you get them right. So keeping that long-term goal in mind is so important. You also spoke in a way which reminded me of that classic definition of sustainable development, which was about how we meet the needs of present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And of course, we've tended generation by generation to squander what we've got, and we leave less and less, particularly for the planet, if we go that way. So lots of big issues there. Now, of course, the economic future for New Zealand it is tricky. You know, we've got the huge agri base. We're off and on with innovation and how we encourage it and how we nurture the kinds of companies which could really deliver the high skill, high wage, high productivity economy, which would support the services and lifestyle that we want. Stephen, I'd like you to talk a little bit about this. How do we break out of this straitjacket we're in to an economy that can deliver better for all of us?
Well, kia ora tātou e te whānau, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and indeed an honour to serve alongside Lucy and Jonathan on the Helen Clark Foundation. And thank you, Helen, for your foresight in establishing this with Peter, and to all the team, thanks for the arrangements that have been made for us. And Helen, I mean, you've put your, as you often do, you've hit the nail right on the head. I mean, there's no one answer to the problem that you pose, of course, but I would say that the biggest challenge facing New Zealand is how we can build a competitive, sustainable, and inclusive economy that can sustain the sort of lifestyles and expectations that New Zealanders aspire to. And as you know, most of my career has been involved in the trade space versus an official and latterly from the perspective of business. And we've had a successive wave of trade negotiations over the last 30 years, and we put in place new trade rules. And today, over 80% of our exports go to markets where we have FTAs, even if not all the FTAs, free trade agreements, are equal. And of course, today, actually literally today and tomorrow, we are seeing considerable strain on the international trading system and considerable uncertainty about the way forward. But here's the thing, New Zealand businesses today have more opportunities open to them than they can fully exploit. We've opened so many new doors, but only a few exporters really are able to go through them. New Zealand Trade and Enterprise identifies around 12,000 exporters in New Zealand, but only 340 companies that export more than $25 million. Apparently, about 700 earn between 5 million and 25 million. That is a very thin base for a developed economy. Exports in New Zealand make up less than 30% of our GDP. In other small advanced economies, we like to compare ourselves with, you know, Ireland, Finland, Singapore. The figure's more like 60%. And the fundamental problem that we face, and that we faced, well, since forever, is this: Aotearoa is unique. We are a developed Western, for want of a better word, nation with a small population base located at some distance from our major markets, relying on a natural resource-based economy. We don't have a large domestic market of scale. We don't have large revenue generating sectors beyond the agri-food sector. I'll come to that. We don't have bigger enterprises that compete on the world stage. We don't have the capital that can empower innovation, job creation, and economic and social development. So how do we address this? That's the big question. And I'm not arguing that we turn our back on the international trading system. Not that you'd expect me to say that. That work we've been doing for the last 30 years has got to continue at the global level. Okay, there'll be fewer FTAs maybe, but we can make them work better. But what we've got to do is to look back home to ensure our economy can deliver for our people. We have to boost productivity and competitiveness, and we need some new ideas to sort that out. And Helen, it's 25 years ago or more that you launched the Knowledge Wave conference. And since then, we've seen the emergence of creative and digital sectors, but even so, our economy remains very dependent on agri-food sector. Once upon a time, we looked to economic reform to transform the economy. And later, we looked to trade liberalization, the opening of global markets. And then we had the fortuitous emergence of China that helped us along the way. But the world, and I think as Jonathan has said, The world is rapidly changing. Protectionism is on the rise. New technologies are casting a big shadow, but also opening opportunity across the world. And we've got this climate change problem that is threatening life itself. This is a multifaceted challenge. One policy instrument can't deliver all we need at this juncture, but we need the best minds to be working on this, in my view, if we want to see a preferred future for Aotearoa, and if we can work out how we can sustain it economically. And I'm looking forward to the ideas in the kōrero today. Kia ora.
Well, if I could 1000% agree with you, I would, because it really sounds very much like speeches I was making 25 years ago of what we needed to do. And, I was thinking, 80% of our exports going to countries that we have some kind of free trade agreement with. I was trying to think, who would the other 20% be? And I suppose you think of the milk powder that goes into North Africa. Even Venezuela used to be a big milk powder market. But the truth is, as you said, we don't have enough exports as a proportion of our GDP. And then, if we leverage from our strengths, I mean, agri-tech, it's not just the commodities. We have technology associated with that, which has long been world leading, but we need to always be upping our game in that. So, yes, so much to get stuck in there. And yes, we have those sort of chains around our ankle of being a long way from markets, and the domestic market's small and we're spread over a long way. But as Ernest Rutherford, who was the first Kiwi to win the Nobel Prize, once said, New Zealand hasn't got much money, so it has to think. Time to think.
Yeah.
So that's what this webinar and this whole program is around. Now, Lucy, I think that leads rather nicely into you, because you wanted to talk about, how we support innovation and sustainability, how we build the talented workforce, how we keep inclusion in mind in that. And one thing I should say to our audience is that you have been, not so long ago, a Deputy Secretary for Policy and Strategy in the Ministry for Pacific peoples in New Zealand. So, the inclusion of all the diverse peoples of our country would be very much top of your mind. So come on in now.
Thanks, Helen. Kia ora, everyone. And I just want to echo colleagues by saying huge kudos to the Foundation for launching this fellowship series. Jonathan and Stephen have been such huge thought leaders here in New Zealand, as have you, Helen, and I'm really proud. So thank you for having me along to this talk today and for the launch of the fellowship series. So critical long-term problems. I guess listening to you, and when I listen to Stephen and Jonathan's points, I do think about enablers. If we want our democracy to thrive, and if we want our economy to deliver well-being for Kiwis, there are some critical enablers in that mix. How do we build and retain the talented workforce we need to achieve those things? And if we want that paradigm shift away from primary production and more exports, how do we support more complex private sector development? And there's a bit of an R&D conundrum in there for New Zealand, because our rates of R&D investment are so low. As you say, Helen, how do we have an inclusive workforce strategy that ensures that all talent sources are being tapped, and that we're capturing young people from all backgrounds and all ethnicities in our tertiary institutions, and launching them off into the workforce in a really active and sustainable way? Because, we do face those problems at the moment in those areas. We're leaking talent, particularly to Australia, particularly of young people. I've seen this in my teams in the public service. I think more needs to be done to package New Zealand as a place to stay and contribute to. If offshore workers can see the value, in my local area, we have an enormous influx of Brits, for example. If they can see the value of coming here for a sustainable, healthy lifestyle for their families, why aren't we encouraging and persuading Kiwis to stay? And certainly, yes, we need to support innovation better and leverage lessons from other countries offshore. And I'm happy to talk a bit more about that later on, if that's okay.